Imagine, if you will, a place intended for ultimate comfort, safety, and community. For a lot of folks, a faith-based environment is exactly that. It's a sanctuary. But what happens when that exact same environment becomes the source of someone's deepest, most enduring psychological trauma? Well, today we're looking at a deeply complex intersection, the documented experiences of LGBTI+ individuals within certain religious environments. To really grasp the weight of this, we need to look at how international human rights bodies view the issue. A report from the UN Independent Expert on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity puts it incredibly plainly. The combined effects of feeling powerless and extreme humiliation generate profound feelings of shame, guilt, self-disgust, and worthlessness, which can result in a damaged self-concept. We're going to explore the data, the sociology, and the medical research that explains exactly how this kind of damage occurs. Welcome to this explainer, Faith, Identity, and Harm. Okay, let's dive right in. Our goal today is to impartially examine the sociological, psychological, and medical data on how religious environments impact LGBTI+ people. We are simply letting the peer-reviewed research and the expert consensus guide us through this highly sensitive topic. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering faith and identity collide, the minority stress effect, spiritual abuse defined, the mental health toll, and finally, the medical consensus. All right, part 1, faith and identity collide. So there's a massive, stark contrast at play right from the jump. On one side, many traditional religious doctrines operate on the assumption that sexual and gender variations are reward-driven choices, essentially behavioral sins or a form of brokenness that a person can and absolutely should choose to heal. But on the flip side, the modern scientific and neurophysiological view tells us something completely different. It shows that these variations are identity-driven. They're core traits locked in during early childhood brain development, way before a kid even has the cognitive ability to make complex choices about who they are. Treating an intrinsic identity like it's just a behavioral choice, that creates an immediate foundational conflict for the individual. This right here is absolutely crucial, understanding this definition of an identity-driven condition. Research points out that because gender and sexual identity are formed at this fundamental pre-cognitive level, they are completely intrinsic and unchangeable. When an environment demands that someone change a foundational aspect of their core personality, it essentially denies their basic humanity. And as you can guess, that sparks an unresolvable internal war. Moving on to part 2, the minority stress effect. Researchers use a framework called minority stress theory. It basically describes the chronic, everyday psychological stress experienced by minority groups. Now, in non-affirming religious environments, this manifests as internalized homophobia. Think about it. Growing up in a space that consistently teaches that LGBT+ identities are sinful or broken forces young people to absorb those beliefs. They internalize that stigma. They literally learn to view themselves as fundamentally flawed or unworthy. And this leads us to a fascinating yet completely tragic paradox. Studies traditionally show that high religiosity and regular church attendance actually protect people against suicidal behaviors. But here's the catch. That is primarily true for heterosexual individuals. For LGBTQ folks, a study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine found the exact opposite. For them, high religiosity often acts as a severe stressor that drastically amplifies the risk of harm. The very institution meant to offer community and a safety net actually strips it away. When we look at the recent data on suicide ideation among LGBTQ youth, it is absolutely striking. Those who stated religion was not important to them had lower risk levels than those who said religion was very important. The individuals who value their faith the most, the ones trying the absolute hardest to reconcile their religious devotion with their intrinsic identity, they actually face the highest odds of suicide ideation and lifetime attempts. The internal friction is just devastating. Which brings us to part 3, spiritual abuse defined. You know, recent research, including a major study out of New Zealand, is actually shifting the language we use to talk about this. Instead of just calling them conversion therapies, researchers are increasingly categorizing these practices as spiritual abuse. This means the use of faith-based teachings, manipulation, and coercion, often leveraging terrifying fears of eternal damnation or demonic possession to control and entrap a person. The experts are recognizing this isn't merely misguided counseling. It's a coercive mechanism that causes profound, lasting psychological harm. And this highlights just how complicated this issue is on the ground. There's this quote from a workbook on religious trauma that says, one of the most problematic areas is that the practitioners are often genuinely caring and loving people. Abuse in these environments is rarely administered by cartoonish villains, right? It is very often masked as loving pastoral care. People are being told they're being helped, saved, or healed out of love. And that makes it incredibly difficult for victims to even realize that they are being subjected to severe psychological abuse. Because it's masked as care, it frequently happens way outside of a therapist's office. We're talking about informal conversion practices, coercive prayer groups, pastoral mentoring that demands gender-appropriate behavior, intense pressure from friends and family, or mandating lifelong celibacy just to remain in the community. Sometimes, a person's intrinsic identity is literally framed as a demonic possession. It creates this insidious web of spiritual and social entrapment. The individual feels like they literally cannot leave without losing God, their family, and their entire social world in one single blow. All right, part 4, the mental health toll. 17%. That is a staggering number. According to survey data from the Trevor Project, 17% of LGBTQ+ youth reported being threatened with or subjected to conversion therapy. This isn't some fringe issue from decades past. It is a present, highly prevalent reality for a huge portion of young people today. So who is actually providing these practices? A study published in Lancet Psychiatry shows that 52.4%, more than half of these conversion practices, are delivered directly by religious leaders or religious organizations. The vast majority of these harmful practices are not coming from licensed medical practitioners operating under standard medical ethics. They are coming from within religious institutions. The documented clinical harms resulting from this are devastating. Trying to cure an identity results in severe, long-term iatrogenic damage. Now, in medical terms, that basically means the treatment itself is what actually causes the illness. Researchers consistently find links to severe depression, PTSD, drastically increased suicidality and self-harm, substance abuse, and even long-term impaired economic participation. When you break someone's foundational sense of self, it ripples outward into literally every single aspect of their adult life. If there's one key thing you should take away from this, it's that the trauma from religion-based conversion practices is uniquely painful. It's distinct. It's not just societal homophobia. It compounds everyday discrimination with a profound sense of spiritual betrayal. Victims aren't just losing their friends. They're told they are losing their eternal belonging and their relationship with the divine. The psychological weight of feeling condemned by the creator of the universe, it is immense. Finally, part 5, the medical consensus. The reality is, there is absolutely zero debate within reputable scientific organizations. None. The American Psychological Association, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the UK's Royal College of Psychiatrists, the UN, they all universally agree LGBTI+ identities are natural human variations. Practices attempting to change them are not just totally ineffective, they are fundamentally unethical and deeply, deeply harmful. So, how do survivors get out and heal? The medical community outlines this pipeline to recovery, and it's a long journey for sure. It begins with fully disengaging from those spiritually abusive environments. Next, it requires serious therapeutic work to integrate a healthy self-concept and unlearn years of deeply ingrained religious misinformation. And finally, survivors essentially have to rebuild their lives from scratch, finding new social support, establishing safe community networks, and rediscovering their own self-worth. True recovery requires a massive holistic approach to mental, physical, and spiritual health. We've covered a ton of heavy but absolutely crucial data today. We've seen how treating an intrinsic identity as a behavioral sin leads straight to minority stress, spiritual abuse, and severe documented mental health crises. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. As we increasingly understand the severe, measurable psychological toll of these environments, how do modern societies balance the right to religious freedom with the fundamental right to an individual's psychological safety and basic humanity? Thank you so much for exploring this data with me today. Keep asking questions, keep digging into the research, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.